Hey guys, this is Tim speaking. I'm a Java architect and developer, and I want to start this series of video tutorials for you to introduce the concepts and the APIs within the Java Enterprise Edition. We will start in this tutorial with JAXB, which is the Java architecture for XML binding. First, I want to talk a little bit about the theoretical concepts of JAXB, and then we will dive into an example application that you can also download and run on your local machine. So first things first. You might know Java, and you'll also know that you have classes in Java. And objects are representations of those classes. So you have a concrete representation of a class, which is an object, right? And the same is true for XML. In the scope of XML, an XSD file is a blueprint for an XML file. The same is true for the Java class. A Java class is a blueprint for an object, right? So if you understood this, then you probably get the idea. So what JAXB now uses is a tool called XJZ to read those XSD files and generate Java classes out of it. And those Java classes contain meta information. So let's have a look at the example project I talked about. And this example project contains the employee XSD in the source main resources folder. And this XSD is a blueprint for an XML. We will have a short look at the concrete representation. It contains, first of all, it contains a container object, which is called employees, which contains a list of employees. So that is why we have an attribute called max occurs. I don't want to tell so much about XML in detail, so maybe I'll recommend to look up some XML tutorial if you're interested in XML. But for now, it's just about how can I convert from XML to Java objects and vice versa. So as we can see here, we have a list of employees, and those employees have some attributes like first name, last name, SSN. I missed out the ID and supervisor ID, but the ID would be right here within this tag. Okay, but that doesn't matter now. So what we're using here is the Maven JAXB 2 plugin to generate Java classes out of this XSD file, and those classes are generated within this package. If we have a look at those generated classes, they look like this. This is the employees class, which is the XML root element. This is one of the annotations, the meta information I mentioned, that the XJC tool generates. And this employees object contains a list of employee objects, and the employee objects can be found here, and they contain first name, last name, and so on. And as we can see here, we have a string first name, we have a string last name, and so on. And the annotation for those elements are XML element, and for the attributes, the annotation is XML attribute. The JAXB context and the marshaller and unmarshaller, sorry, use this information to marshal and unmarshal the objects or strings accordingly. So, but what does that mean? Let's look at the runtime view. In the runtime, we have a concrete Java object and we have a concrete XML file. So we create a JAXB context, and within this JAXB context, we create a marshaller. And what this marshaller does is what is called marshalling. It marshals a Java object to an XML file or to an XML string. So it reads a Java object and generates an XML string out of it. And the unmarshaller does exactly the opposite. It reads an XML string and creates a Java object out of this. As I've mentioned earlier, we will have a look at an example, and for this reason I've deployed a RESTful web service on a Tomcat server, and we'll have a look at a Postman collection, and this Postman collection is also part of this Maven project right here. So you can see in the etc folder, I have provided you with the Postman connection. And what we'll now do, we'll execute those requests. First of all, the GET request, which is the Marshall request, and we forward some parameters as query parameters, Tom, Smith, and so on. And we'll step in the debugger. So here the method Marshall is called, which takes those parameters, those query parameters we specified in Postman, and it builds the employee object, which is pretty straightforward. And now we call the Marshall method. And as you can see here, we create a JAXB context, create the marshaller, set a property so that the output is formatted properly. And here we create this containing object. Remember, we have an employee object, but the XML root element is actually an employees object. So we create this object, add the employee object we've received as a method parameter to the list of employees. So we have one employee in the list, and we call the Marshall method. The Marshall method also gets a string writer so that it can write the output to a string. And now we should see the XML file as a response, and that is true. So it contains Tom Smith with a social security number and a salary. So, and if we call the unMarshall method, we provide the XML file in the post body, and in the corresponding method in the web service, which is this unMarshall method here, we simply forward the XML file we have in the post body to this unMarshall method. So here we're already at the spot. And what we do, we create a context, we create an unMarshaller, and we'll forward the XML file. So the unMarshaller reads the XML file and creates a Java object, namely the employees object, out of it. So we have to cast it, and then we forward this employees object to the print employees method, where we simply loop through the employee objects which are contained in the employees object, and then we print the information. So what the response of this request is, it's just a plain text containing the printed information about our employee objects. So we can see the deserialization and the serialization, namely the marshalling and unmarshalling, works perfectly fine here. So okay, we'll end this tutorial here. If you're interested in some other advanced topics regarding JAXB, like maybe how can I handle name clashes with an external binding file, or how can I use catalog files if I have some schemes which reference other schemes online, but I'm not allowed to use online resources within my company, then I can download them in the first place, and I can use catalog files. So I could do a tutorial on this one. Also, please let me know, but I could also do a tutorial on JAXRS, on JPA, or stuff like that. Please let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and take care and goodbye.